Hello, my name is Kyle Matthews. I'm Executive Director of the Montreal Institute for Genocide and Human Rights Studies. I'm very pleased today to have another interview as part of the AI and COVID Disinformation Initiative, supported by the OSCE's Office for the Representative of Freedom of the Media. Really pleased today to have with us Marcus Kolga. Marcus is the founder of DisinfoWatch, an initiative at the MacDonald-Laurier Institute, one of the top experts on disinformation, foreign interference. So Marcus, wonderful to have you join us today.
Thanks for having me on, Kyle.
So Marcus, I want to talk about kind of three things today. One is disinformation around COVID, and also the issue about artificial intelligence, what it can be used to detect disinformation or its role in radicalizing people to believe in disinformation, and how it all ties back to our human rights, the strength of democracies, and freedom of expression. So first, tell me a bit about you founded DisinfoWatch. Tell me what that initiative does and why it's important.
Well, I started looking at disinformation already back in 2007, 2008, particularly Russian disinformation targeting the Nordics and the Baltic states. That was really the first sort of testing ground for a lot of this foreign disinformation that we're seeing today. Back then it was rather unsophisticated. It targeted primarily historical narratives and such. And it's grown ever since then. We saw what happened in 2014 with the invasion of Crimea and how the Russians used disinformation in that operation. 2016 obviously was a huge moment for Russian disinformation and influence operations when they essentially helped destabilize and interfered in the U.S. presidential election. And much of what we've seen over the past years, and certainly what we saw in Washington a couple of weeks ago, is a product of that. The DisinfoWatch platform was started primarily to look at foreign disinformation with regards to COVID, how regimes in Moscow and Beijing were using various different narratives, conspiracy theories, hoaxes and such to influence us and attack us and to sow confusion using COVID. And so what we do on a near daily basis is look through the various channels that we have, whether it's on social media, state-sponsored media, to see if we can detect any disinformation. And once we do, we try and capture that, create a post on DisinfoWatch so that we can expose these for media, policymakers and such, so that they'll be aware of those narratives when they emerge. And so far, we've collected several hundred of them, and we're having quite a bit of success in doing what we've set out to do.
And what are some of the main forms of disinformation you're seeing? Like, give me some examples. What are you seeing that should concern, governments around the world, particularly OSCE member states? Like, what are you seeing that's being spread online?
I mean, a lot of this stuff is pretty run of the mill. Hoaxes about various different cures that we're seeing promoted. Conspiracy theories about the origins of the virus. We were talking earlier about the fact that the Chinese government has really undertaken a massive and very aggressive campaign over the past few days to promote the narrative that the COVID virus was developed in a U.S. military laboratory in Fort Detrick, Maryland. The same narrative that was actually used by the Soviets in the 1980s to falsely claim that AIDS was developed by the U.S. government. And so we're seeing this sort of activity on the Russian side as well. The Russians have now picked up this narrative again and have started promoting it on its own channels. The other more concerning narratives that we're looking at are those that promote anti-mask movements, anti-lockdown movements. And to be sure, a lot of these are organic. They're domestic in nature, the actual movements. But what we're seeing is a lot of foreign platforms, whether it's sock puppets, trolls, promoting these movements and the events. And I'm quite concerned seeing these because if we take them for what they are, they may be, innocent. They may be, a small marginal group of people just pushing back against the frustrations that the health protocols that we have caused. But at their core, these are anti-government movements. They're promoted by radical people on the right, and we're seeing these movements grow. And what these foreign governments are doing, they're using certain platforms, especially conspiracy theory platforms, to legitimize some of these narratives. And the growth of the number of members on these social media groups is really exploding. And we're seeing other sort of conspiracy theory linked groups and marginal sort of extreme groups, separatist movements, Western separatist movements in Canada, who are also adopting these narratives. So, I'm quite concerned about this, and we're seeing a lot of it, but we're not really addressing these narratives very, very effectively at this point. And my fear is that they're going to continue polarizing an already polarized society in the coming months.
So Marcus, when you're seeing this, is it predominantly targeting Canada and the US, or are you seeing countries in Europe also be affected by the same issue? Is it really Western European countries as well? Is it Central Europe? Is it all over?
Yeah, no, that's a very good question. So I actually came upon these anti-mask and anti-lockdown narratives through some Russian state media reports that were focused on Germany. So in Germany, we have the Querdenken movement, which is very much, it's like the QAnon movement, but the German version of it. And back in early August, they had some pretty massive rallies in Berlin, which were they were covered nonstop by RT and broadcast not just to German RT, but to RT and their platforms around the world. So these aren't, it's not a movement, and this isn't a problem that's exclusive to Canada. This is very much a problem in Europe. We're seeing a lot of the far-right populist movements pick up on these narratives. And so it's a problem in Europe, it's a problem in Canada, and certainly in the US. And what I'd also add to that, I just mentioned QAnon. These anti-mask narratives seem to be linking into that entire QAnon movement, the conspiracy movement. So that's deeply concerning to see as well.
So this, people ask, why should governments care about disinformation? And I think you hit the nail on the head. You said some of these movements are anti-government movements.
Yes.
So in the long run, they can pose a challenge to democracy, to human rights. It really is something that we have to perhaps pick up our game and get more serious about.
Well, yeah, at their core, these movements are, what they're doing is they're eroding trust in our elected public officials. They're eroding trust in media, in mainstream media and established media. And eventually what that leads to is an erosion of trust in each other. And that is one of the objectives of foreign disinformation, is the subversion and undermining and destabilizing of our democracies. And that's the effect. It's this corrosive effect that these conspiracy theories have. Say what you will, or whatever the narrative is, whether it's anti-mask, anti-vax, or anything else, suggesting that our political leaders are pedophiles and such, they all lead to the same end. And you're absolutely right. I don't think that Western governments at this point are doing nearly enough to address this problem. I think some governments, the European Union with the Eastern Stratcom and EU versus Disinfo is really, much further ahead than a lot of other Western countries individually within the EU and certainly in North America. If we look at Canada, Canada has absolutely failed in this regard. There's apparently some new legislation and regulations coming out down the road, but so far we haven't seen enough. And this isn't a problem. It's not something that we should be addressing in a year. This is now. We should have been addressing this 3 or 4 years ago. But here we are right now, and we're still not doing anything. We need to do something now, and we really need to work together. Europe, the United States, Canada, and our allies in Asia as well. So
I'd like to get to talk a bit about artificial intelligence. I know you're not an expert on AI. Neither am I. But we're talking about, how do we deal with disinformation in cyberspace on all these platforms? And there's just so much data and things that humans can't do ourselves. I'm wondering, have you done any research? Is anyone doing anything using AI, or are we at a loss? Like what are you uncovering in looking at disinfo and AI?
Yeah, I think we're just getting started on looking at how AI can help our research in detecting and monitoring disinformation. I think a lot of work in that area in cyber was focused on tracking bots in the past, which were, I think, effective in the sort of 2014, 2015, 2016 world. I'm not sure today how effective bots are. I think a lot of these social media platforms already are deploying AI to detect that bot-like inauthentic activity. And even when we see it in our sort of qualitative research and just going through posts manually, you can see, the use of hashtags. I don't know how many people really use hashtags. Any normal people use hashtags. I think we just sort of tweet, and there are various terms that are picked up just organically in those tweets. So we don't use hashtags. I think, going back to what we were talking about earlier, the fact that the Chinese government is right now engaging in this new origin conspiracy theory. They're using the hashtag Fort Detrick. And so I've spent most of the morning today sort of going through those hashtags and analyzing them. And I would say that 95% of the tweets that I'm seeing are clearly, it's bot-like activity that's out there. So, as far as, those bots go and AI goes, I think bots, they speak to themselves. I'm not sure how much of an effect they're having in the real outside world. And as far as any sort of other AI that's used to promote disinformation, I think we're limited to primarily social media platforms. Even on Facebook, you can generally detect the bot-like activity on some of these accounts. Over the weekend, I spent a lot of time analyzing some of the disinformation surrounding the Alexei Navalny and the protests that were happening in Moscow. And you can see, these, the accounts that are out there, they'll make some sort of a comment, and then, if you go to their actual account site, they're posting pictures of teddy bears and waterfalls, and then occasionally these political messages. So if we can develop some AI to detect that would be great. I think that a lot of the work with regards to disinformation, though, is really, it's qualitative. It's understanding the intent behind it, who's behind it, what are the motivations, who is the disinformation, what goals is it helping achieve. And I'm not sure that we're there yet with AI to use that to help us analyze it. There are certain ways it can help us, but it won't help us analyze it. On what I am afraid of with regards to AI is how AI is being used to create deep fakes and other forms of disinformation. I'm sure that you've seen it, and anybody else watching this video, if you're on Twitter, there are often these ads for this app that allows you to, I think it's called Reface, if I'm not mistaken. It's scary how sophisticated this sort of technology. You can just get an app and sort of rescan your own face or somebody else's face and place it on somebody else's. And I think we're going to be seeing more of this. Obviously, this technology has already been around for some time, limited primarily to porn sites and etc. But I think this is emerging, and it's going to get the quality of the technology is just only going to improve. And right now, when we're in this era, and hopefully leaving this era where we have some elected officials who are supporting conspiracy theories and legitimizing them, as we saw in the U.S., if we add deep fakes into that mix, we already have a large part of the population who's having trouble discerning truth from fact when it comes to information on the internet, shared on social media. If we add deep fakes to that mix, it's only going to cause more confusion and potentially trouble.
I have seen that apps where you can put any face onto Arnold Schwarzenegger as the Terminator, and I've seen it go viral. But I'm with you. We're in the era of we won't be able to tell what's true or not, and AI powered deepfake technology is another aspect of disinformation that's going to impact us. Marcus, I'd like to maybe just turn this maybe one or two last questions and get more about what all this means for human rights, about the combination of AI, disinformation, online manipulation. What does this mean for freedom of expression? Because I think there's two things, and I'll just mention them. One is, if you believe in a conspiracy theory, it's not a crime, and if you get taken offline, is that limit your freedom of expression? Another aspect is that there are journalists writing in news outlets, sharing articles online about truthful information about COVID, and you have people, and sometimes bots, AI attacking them, reducing their ability to share information and almost undergoing cyber harassment, and limiting their freedom of expression. So how do you see freedom of expression in all of this? Is it something that we have to get right? Do we have to, like, what should governments be doing to do this careful balance of fighting disinformation but guaranteeing freedom of expression?
Yeah, and it's not just bots that are attacking these journalists and analysts who are posting online. There's sock puppets, and of course, if we go to influence operations, there are proxies, that there are supporters, enablers of these regimes who are living right here in Canada and Europe, working in universities, academics, former diplomats, who are also coming out and attacking the truth, as it were. The balance to all of this, I think, is the key, and this is what I think is one of our greatest challenges today, is where do we find that balance? I don't think anyone wants to engage in censorship. That's not the answer here. But then again, freedom of speech is also a human right. I mean, this is one of the things that we're seeing, when it comes to foreign influence and intimidation. We're seeing these foreign governments using either social media platforms, state media and such, to try and intimidate critics into silence. We're seeing, of course, a lot of this within the Chinese community, among Chinese human rights activists. Human rights activists in the Iranian community, the Russian critics of the Putin regime, they're all facing these sorts of attacks. And we need to take this seriously. This is, freedom of expression is a fundamental human right. And so if we, in the Canadian or in the Western context, if we allow foreign regimes to try and silence whether it's journalists or critics, this is a huge problem, and it's a violation of their human rights. And we have to look at the problem through that specific lens, to protect our own human rights and free speech. At the same time, how do we deal with those individuals who support these regimes, who are helping amplify narratives that are supportive of them, or even as you mentioned, conspiracy theories? People have a right to, individuals, organizations have a right to say these silly things. But I think as Western citizens, we also have a right, and I think that our governments have a responsibility to protect us from them. So whether that's labeling foreign disinformation for what it is, I think that some tech companies are doing a pretty good job of labeling foreign disinformation. RT is clearly labeled as Russian state media. We need to do more of that. One example of this is with conspiracy theories. Is there's a Canadian website based in Montreal called globalresearch.ca, which was recently identified by the State Department as being one of the pillars of Russian foreign disinformation. I was on a call with Google a few weeks ago to talk about how Google can help combat these sorts of foreign disinformation and extremism. And we went to the globalresearch.ca website, and there was some advertising on there. And we clicked on the little blue add choices button, and it took us to a Google page, which, Google admitted that it means that Google is helping this sort of a website and other websites like it generate revenue, and that keeps them alive. So, I think we need to work with our tech companies to make sure that they're not facilitating and enabling these sorts of platforms, but the government shouldn't be responsible for, and we shouldn't be taking down these sorts of platforms. I mean, they may be spouting lies and such, but there must be some way that we can, first of all, regulate any sort of revenue streams that they have, but also making sure that we, like I said, label, whether it's these websites or any sort of foreign state broadcast make sure that those who are watching them understand that it is possibly state media, state-funded information that they're receiving from them.
Marcus, I want to thank you for taking time to join us today and to share your knowledge, your expertise, and for ending this with some really concrete things that could be done to try to deal with disinformation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kyle, and thank you for everything that you're doing.